Maybe if she practiced her Korean instead of practicing her excuses, she'd actually understand the report, Kwon Dae-sik said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear. A thin smile on his face as Lena Cruz stood frozen at the front of the conference room, papers trembling slightly in her hand. The room laughed. The way rooms laugh when they're afraid to disagree with a senior executive. Then the door opened, and Ju Sung-min walked in, 3 minutes early for a meeting no one expected him to attend at all. "Continue," he said quietly, taking a seat at the head of the table, eyes fixed on Dae-sik with an intensity that made the laughter die instantly. "I want to hear the rest of what Miss Cruz has to say. She's the only person in this building I've trusted with the real numbers for the last 6 months." Dae-sik's smile faltered, just slightly, just long enough for Sung-min to notice exactly what he'd been hoping to catch. To understand how a mocking joke exposed a betrayal 3 years in the making, we have to go back 5 months. To the rainy morning Lena Cruz walked into Sung-min's office for the very first time. Lena Cruz had lived in Seoul for 4 years, and in every single one of them, her accent had arrived in every room before she did. She had come from Manila on a graduate business scholarship, fluent in English, competent in Korean by any reasonable professional standard, and gifted with the kind of sharp financial instincts that had made her the top of her cohort in international business analysis. None of that had stopped colleagues, clients, and strangers alike from commenting on her accent the moment she opened her mouth in a meeting, small, careless remarks at first, then bolder ones, as people realized how rarely anyone challenged them for it. She had taken a position as a junior financial analyst at Ju Sung-min's real estate conglomerate 2 years earlier, climbing steadily through competence alone, since the social capital that came easily to Korean-born colleagues had never extended to her in quite the same way. She sent a portion of every paycheck home to Manila, where her mother was raising Lena's younger brother alone after their father's construction accident had left him unable to work. The money covering tuition, medication, and the small constant gap between what her family earned and what they needed. "You could work anywhere," said Grace Villanueva, a Filipino nurse and Lena's closest friend in Seoul, meeting most weekends at a small Filipino restaurant near Itaewon that had become their unofficial embassy of home. "Why stay somewhere that treats your accent like a punchline instead of just part of how you talk? Because the pay here clears my brother's medical bills faster than anywhere else would," Lena said, only half joking, doing the familiar mental math she ran every month between what she earned and what her family needed. "I don't have the luxury of picking employers based on who's kindest about my vowels." The mockery had become a quiet, constant undercurrent in Lena's daily work, never severe enough, individually, to formally report, always framed as harmless teasing whenever she pushed back, and persistent enough that she had learned, over 2 years, to brace herself slightly every time she had to speak in a meeting with more than a few colleagues present. Kwon Dae-sik, a senior executive nearing the end of a long-respected career, had become the most consistent offender, delivering his comments with the easy, casual confidence of a man who had never once been made to answer for them. It was 5 months before that conference room confrontation that Lena's competence, rather than her accent, finally caught the attention of someone with the standing to matter, Ju Sung-min himself, reviewing a quarterly report that flagged inconsistencies in a subsidiary's numbers that no one else on the finance team had caught. Inconsistencies traced back to Lena's careful, unglamorous analysis buried 3 levels below where reports typically reached his desk. He requested her directly for a follow-up briefing, a summons that sent her department into a flurry of confused speculation, and Lena walked into his office that afternoon with no idea that the meeting was about to reshape the entire trajectory of her career, and considerably more of her life than that. She had no idea Sungmin's real estate empire sat atop a far more dangerous foundation than glass towers and land acquisitions. She simply knew that, for the first time in 2 years, someone with real power had looked at her work instead of her accent. Ju Sungmin ran one of Seoul's largest real estate conglomerates, and beneath its gleaming developments and high-profile acquisitions, a criminal network that moved laundered money through property deals, controlled territory through calculated pressure on rival developers, and maintained influence through a careful, decades-old web of favors and leverage across the city's business and political circles. He had inherited the empire from his father at 31, and by 39 he had survived 2 attempted hostile takeovers and 1 betrayal that had cost him more than either. A betrayal from a childhood friend and longtime chief operating officer, a man whose Korean was flawless, whose manner was reassuring, whose loyalty had sounded, in every conversation for over a decade, absolutely genuine. Right up until the day Sungmin discovered the man had been selling internal financial data to a rival conglomerate for nearly 3 years. He never once sounded like he was lying, Sungmin told his lawyer. Ernesto, no, correcting himself, told his longtime advisor, Baek Yong-ho, flatly, in the weeks after the betrayal surfaced. That's what I can't stop thinking about. Every word out of his mouth sounded exactly like loyalty. I've realized I have no idea what betrayal actually sounds like, because it apparently sounds identical to everything else. Since then, Sungmin had grown quietly, corrosively suspicious of fluency itself, the smooth, confident, native ease with which most of his inner circle spoke to him, reassured him, agreed with him. Perfect Korean, perfect manners, perfect displays of respect had all, in his experience, turned out to be perfectly compatible with betrayal. He found himself, without fully articulating the pattern even to himself, drawn instead to voices and perspectives that stood slightly outside the smooth, practiced rhythms of his usual circle, people whose difference from that circle made them, paradoxically, less likely to blend seamlessly into a conspiracy built on sounding exactly like everyone else. You need someone from outside the usual finance track to double-check the subsidiary numbers, his chief financial officer suggested, after another round of internal audits had turned up nothing, despite Sungmin's persistent unease about a leak he couldn't yet prove existed. Someone whose analysis isn't shaped by the same assumptions everyone else on that team shares. No one gets close enough to sound perfectly loyal and turn out to be lying again. That had become Sungmin's unspoken rule since the COO's betrayal, a rule that had kept him alive through subsequent challenges to his territory, and had also, slowly, isolated him inside an organization full of voices he had learned to doubt, precisely because they sounded so reassuringly familiar. He did not yet know that a junior analyst from Manila, whose accent had made her an easy target for casual office cruelty, was about to become the one person in his organization whose perspective he trusted completely, not despite her outsider status, but because of it. Lena's summons to Sungmin's office arrived without explanation, and she spent the walk there running through every possible reason a chairman might want to see a junior analyst directly. None of the scenarios she imagined landing anywhere close to what actually awaited her. Your report flagged inconsistencies in the Gangnam subsidiary's quarterly numbers that 3 senior analysts missed entirely, Sungmin said, without preamble, sliding the document across his desk. Walk me through exactly how you found them, Lena, startled but steadying quickly, did, explaining, in careful, precise detail, the specific pattern of small, easily overlooked discrepancies between reported revenue and actual property transaction filings. Discrepancies that suggested funds moving through the subsidiary in ways the official numbers didn't fully account for. The senior team assumed the subsidiary's reporting software just had a formatting quirk, Lena said. I didn't have the same assumptions about that system, so I checked the raw filings myself instead of trusting the summary reports. That's really the whole difference. Sung Min studied her for a long moment. You didn't trust the summary because you're new enough not to assume it was reliable. I suppose so, Lena said, uncertain where the observation was headed. That's not a weakness, Sung Min said. In this building right now, it might be the most valuable trait anyone on my finance team has. He asked her to continue the deeper analysis quietly, reporting directly to him rather than through the usual chain, a request Lena found strange but professionally exciting enough not to question closely, until 3 weeks later, her expanded analysis uncovered something considerably more serious than a reporting quirk, a consistent, carefully obscured pattern of financial data leaving the subsidiary systems on a schedule that aligned, suspiciously, with a rival conglomerate's recent, unusually well-timed acquisition moves in the same territory. She brought the finding to Sung Min directly, in a private meeting that excluded the rest of the finance team entirely. Someone senior enough to access this data without triggering alerts is feeding it to Daewon Group, Lena said, laying out the timeline carefully. I can't prove who yet, but whoever it is has access most junior staff wouldn't have. Sungmin's expression sharpened into the particular, careful stillness Lena had not yet learned to recognize as danger calculating itself. Keep digging, he said. Report only to me. No one else in this building learns what you found until I decide how to handle it. Who are you? He added, almost as an afterthought, studying her with new attention, that you'd bring something this sensitive directly to me, instead of through channels that might have been safer for your own position? Because the numbers didn't lie to me, Lena said simply. I don't know yet who's lying to you, but I know the data isn't. Over the following weeks, Sung Min began relying on Lena for considerably more than the subsidiary investigation, drawing her into strategic conversations that had nothing to do with her official junior analyst role at all, a shift that Lena found both professionally thrilling and, at times, uncomfortably exposing, given how visibly it set her apart from colleagues who had spent years cultivating far less scrutinized proximity to the chairman. You've been in 3 private meetings with him this month, said her direct supervisor, with a tight, careful neutrality that didn't quite mask her unease. People are noticing. I'm doing the work he's asked me to do, Lena said evenly, refusing to apologize for something she hadn't sought out and couldn't control. If people have questions about that, they can ask him directly. It was during one of these expanding sessions that Lena refused, for the first time, to be managed the way junior staff usually managed proximity to executive attention, with excessive deference, careful flattery, and eagerness to agree with whatever the person in power suggested. Sung Min had, testing her the way he now tested everyone eventually, floated a strategic theory about the leak's likely source that Lena's own analysis didn't actually support. I don't think that's right, she said plainly, laying her evidence out again, more clearly this time. The access pattern doesn't match that person's role. If you want me to keep working this investigation honestly, I need you to hear when the data disagrees with your instinct, not just when it confirms it. Sung Min was quiet for a moment, something shifting behind his careful expression. Most people in your position would have simply agreed with me, he said. Most people in my position have spent 2 years learning that disagreeing with anyone senior gets treated as a character flaw, rather than useful information, Lena said. I'm choosing to disagree with you anyway, because you specifically hired me for numbers that don't flatter anyone's assumptions. That has to include yours. Sung Min almost smiled, an expression his security detail hadn't seen cross his face in longer than any of them could recall. One late evening, reviewing timeline data together long past the office's usual hours, Sung Min told her something he had never told anyone outside his innermost circle. My last chief operating officer sounded exactly like loyalty for over a decade, he said quietly, staring at the data spread across his desk rather than at her. Perfect Korean, perfect manners. I've spent 3 years since then, distrusting anyone whose fluency in this world sounds too smooth, too familiar. You stand outside all of that. Your accent makes people underestimate you constantly, and it turns out that's exactly why I trust your judgment more than almost anyone else's in this building. That's not exactly a comfortable compliment, Lena said, a wry edge to her voice. Being trusted because I'm easy to dismiss? No, Sungmin agreed. It's not comfortable, but it's honest. And I've learned honest matters to me more than comfortable does. Kwon Dae-sik had served as a senior executive within Sungmin's organization for 19 years, respected, tenured, nearing a retirement that, by his own quiet calculation, would leave him considerably less financially secure than a man of his standing believed he deserved after 2 decades of loyal service. He had also, for the last 3 years, been secretly selling internal financial data to Daewon Group, a rival conglomerate, in exchange for a payout structured to activate fully upon his retirement. Arrangement Dae-sik had convinced himself was simply, belatedly, extracting the value he felt the organization had never properly compensated him for across 19 years of overlooked promotions and underappreciated loyalty. Lena's expanding investigation and her growing proximity to Sungmin had begun to unsettle Dae-sik considerably more than he let himself show. Her outsider status, the very thing he had spent 2 years mocking, casually, consistently in front of colleagues who rarely challenged him, meant she operated with none of the internal blind spots that had let his leak go unnoticed for 3 years. She checked raw data instead of trusting summaries. She asked questions colleagues had learned, through years of office culture, not to ask. The junior analyst is getting too close, Dae-sik told his Daewon Group contact over a private call, careful, quiet, in an office he'd swept for listening devices more than once in recent weeks. She's been in private meetings with the chairman for a month now. If she keeps pulling on this thread, she'll find the pattern eventually, and it'll trace back to me. Then make sure she's not credible before she finds it, his contact suggested, coldly practical. Dae-sik's mockery of Lena's accent, which had always carried a casual, careless cruelty, took on a sharper, more deliberate edge in the weeks that followed. Public jokes designed, though few in the room fully registered the calculation behind them, to slowly erode her credibility in front of colleagues before her investigation could produce something damning enough to matter. Lena mentioned to Sungmin once, cautiously, referring to Dae-sik's public comments. More frequent, more pointed. I don't know if that's just him being himself, or something else. Sungmin's expression sharpened. The same careful stillness Lena had learned meant something dangerous was being calculated. Keep noticing, he said quietly, and made a call that evening that set his own quiet, parallel investigation into Dae-sik's access and behavior into motion. It happened during the conference room presentation. The cold open first revealed Lena delivering a quarterly briefing to a room of senior staff. Dae-sik interrupting with his usual mocking comment about her accent, the room laughing nervously, and Sungmin walking in 3 minutes early, having received, that same morning, the final piece of evidence his parallel investigation had been quietly assembling for weeks. Financial records tracing a specific pattern of data access directly to Dae-sik's credentials, time-stamped precisely against the Daewon Group's suspicious acquisition timing Lena had first flagged months earlier. Continue, Sungmin said, taking his seat, eyes fixed on Dae-sik with an intensity that silenced the room instantly. I want to hear the rest of what Miss Cruz has to say. She's the only person in this building I've trusted with the real numbers for the last 6 months. Dae-sik's smile faltered. Lena continued her briefing, steady despite the sudden charged tension in the room, and finished it in full before Sungmin addressed Dae-sik directly. Stay after the others leave, he said simply, and the room emptied with unusual speed. Alone with Dae-sik and Lena, Sung-min laid the evidence across the table with unhurried precision. 19 years, he said. And for the last 3, you've been selling this organization's data to Daewon Group, timed carefully around a retirement payout you arranged to protect yourself. Meanwhile, you've spent months trying to discredit the one analyst sharp enough to notice the pattern, mocking her accent in front of colleagues specifically to undermine her credibility before she could prove what you were doing. That night, before Sung-min could formally escalate the matter, Dae-sik made one final, desperate move, attempting to physically remove the physical evidence Lena had compiled from her secured workstation after hours, and finding Lena herself still there, working late, directly in his path. "Give me the drive," Dae-sik said, low and urgent, blocking her exit. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into." "I understand exactly what I found," Lena said, backing toward the emergency call button she'd noted, with careful, deliberate attention, the very first week she'd started handling sensitive material. "And I understand you're the one who spent 2 years mocking my accent instead of worrying about the fact that I was always going to eventually check the raw data." Security arrived within moments, summoned by the alarm Lena triggered before Dae-sik could reach her, subduing him before the confrontation could escalate further. Sung-min addressed the full executive board the following morning, calmly, laying out 3 years of evidence with the same unhurried precision he brought to every difficult decision. 19 years of trusted service, he said, and for the last 3, Dae-sik sold this organization's most sensitive data to our largest rival, timed around his own retirement payout. When a junior analyst got close enough to notice the pattern, he spent months trying to discredit her publicly, and last night attempted to physically remove the evidence himself when that failed. Dae-sik, present in the room, his composure entirely gone, offered no defense beyond the same desperate justification he'd given himself for 3 years, that 19 years of underappreciated loyalty had earned him something the organization had never properly given him. "Loyalty that requires betraying the people who trusted you isn't loyalty," Sung-min said. "It's simply patience, waiting for a payout." Lena, present at the board's request, added the final, specific detail that closed the case completely. "The access logs show exactly which files he pulled and when, cross-referenced against Daewon's acquisition timeline. There's no ambiguity left in the pattern. Dae-sik's justice, when it came, was precise rather than violent. Full exposure of the betrayal to the board and to relevant regulatory bodies, ensuring both criminal liability and total professional disgrace, alongside forfeiture of the retirement payout structure he had spent 3 years carefully protecting. He would face the consequences of 19 years of trust broken in the final chapter of a career he could no longer salvage. In the weeks after Dae-sik's exposure, something in Sung-min's organization shifted in a way that outlasted the scandal itself. The board, chastened and grateful in equal measure, formally promoted Lena into a senior analyst role with direct reporting access to the chairman. A gesture so far beyond her previous position that colleagues who had once laughed along with Dae-sik's jokes now approached her with a new, careful respect they hadn't extended in 2 years. Sung-min, for his part, made a change that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with a lesson Lena had taught him without ever intending to teach it. "I spent 3 years assuming fluency and familiarity were the same thing as trustworthiness," he told her one evening, the two of them sharing tea in his office long after the rest of the building had emptied. "You taught me the opposite could be just as true. That the person who sounds the least like everyone else in the room might be the only one not performing anything at all. I never set out to prove that," Lena said honestly. "I just checked the numbers and refused to pretend Dae-sik's comments were harmless when they clearly weren't. That's all this ever was from where I was standing." "That's not all it was," Sung-min said quietly. "Not for a long time now," he asked carefully. Without his usual guarded practicality, whether she would consider staying in his life beyond the organization's org chart entirely, something he was still learning how to properly name. Something closer to a partner whose honesty he had come to need rather than simply appreciate. Lena thought of her brother's medical bills, steadily easing now with her new salary, of 2 years spent bracing herself every time she opened her mouth, in a room full of people ready to mock the sound of it, and of a man who had listened past her accent from the very first meeting, and never once stopped. "I'd like that," she said, "on the condition you keep listening past the accent, even after it stops being useful to your investigations. I don't want to be trusted only because I'm convenient." Sung-min smiled, a rare, unguarded expression few in the building had seen from him in years. "I'm not sure it was ever about convenience," he said. "I think I just finally learned what honesty actually sounds like." Months later, at a small gathering celebrating Lena's promotion, her mother visited from Manila for the first time, watching her daughter address a room full of senior executives in a voice that no longer needed anyone's permission to be heard exactly as it was. If Lena's quiet resilience and Sung-min's hard-won trust moved you the way it moved us, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments. Did you suspect Dae's sick before the board meeting? Or did his betrayal surprise you completely? Stay close, because